Lots of room. He's 40, like a rocket. Look at Ginty go. Breaks a tackle. He's 20. He's 10. He's touchdown.
Here's a long run. Oklahoma State gonna do it again, and guess who? Big O to the house.
Milroe gonna run it again. Got a lane. Kicked in the turbo. Milroe. Goodbye. Touchdown, Bama.
Pump fake. Cook. End zone. Caught. Touchdown. Luther Burden the third.
This is the CFFsite's college football playoff reaction show following Week 15 championship week. The bracket is set, and I'm going to talk about how that relates to college fantasy football because the CFF site will be commissioning some college football playoff bowl fantasy leagues this year that will just be teams that make the college football playoff. You draft players, you get them through the run of the college football playoffs, and you accumulate points throughout. So as we talk about the bracket, and there's a lot to talk about, we'll actually discuss how that relates to college fantasy football as well, and we'll probably do another show before the start of the season, before the start of the playoffs. But this is just a reaction to the playoffs, the seeding, the brackets. Let's get into it. Again, this is just my opinion. I've watched some of the shows now, some of the reactions, and opinions vary out there. But let's just go ahead and jump right into it. And I think the one thing that really jumps out to me, and I think everybody or a lot of people would be in agreement in this because it seems like a hot button topic is that I think we just need to scrap the buys for 4 of the 5 top conference winners and just go, if we really want a balanced bracket, we have to get the seeding as close to the top 4 seeds getting buys as possible. I just think when you look at the bracket and you see that the number 9 and the number 12 ranked teams both get buys, yeah, they're benefits of winning a conference, but all conferences are not created equal. I think most people would agree that the SEC and the Big Ten are the 2 best conferences, and I think they got the best draws in this, and I'll mention that, and I'll go into it. But the one thing that I look at this bracket, and I say, you know what, there's a lot of games out there that could go either way. I do think some teams got tougher draws than others. And I'll just come out and say it. I think number 1, Oregon, has the worst draw in the entire college football playoff. The only undefeated team and the number 1 seed could possibly face Tennessee or Ohio State in round 2. And a possible matchup, which to me, Texas got one of the best draws in the bracket as well. A draw against Texas in the semifinal. To me, Oregon got the most difficult draw in the bracket. I think Penn State has to feel pretty good with that home matchup against SMU in late December. They get a matchup against Boise on a neutral site. If you're Penn State, you have to feel pretty good. I think Georgia, considering the situation of we don't know what's going on yet with Carson Beck, has to feel pretty good with a matchup against Indiana or Notre Dame. I do think, here's the thing. None of these matchups are going to be easy. I don't think we have a clear-cut dominant team this year. Oregon has looked as close to that as possible, but I don't think they're unbeatable, especially when you reference that Ohio State matchup against, on the road earlier this year when they hosted Ohio State, and then Penn State scored at will against them in the Big Ten championship game on a neutral site. I think we're going to get some good football. So, let's just talk about the debate right now at the 11 seed, SMU, Alabama. I was making a case for South Carolina. I would say, South Carolina beat the team that beat SMU and lost by 2 points at Alabama, got hosed in a game against LSU, could only have 2 losses. But you know what? Here's the deal. I don't think Alabama going to Penn State presents much tougher of a game for Nittany Lions than SMU does. So for me, I don't really care who got in at 11. I thought Alabama would get in. They put in SMU. We'll see what happens. My only fear is that I do feel all conferences are not created equal. And I look at these two matchups in the first round and I'm like, I can see Texas handling Clemson pretty easily. And I can make a case where Penn State handles SMU easily. And the ACC is bounced in two easy matchups. And you wonder, okay, what happens if we were to put an Alabama there or a South Carolina there or even a Miami? But I just don't think Miami had a leg to stand on. I think the ACC not scheduling, and look, it's not their fault, but SMU, Clemson, and Miami didn't play one another, and it seems like it was to their benefit this year because they didn't cannibalize one another. Because as it looks now, SMU gets the spot. So the situation in which those teams did not play one another actually benefited the conference. Because you can make a case that if SMU, Miami, and Clemson somehow played one another in a round robin throughout the season, there's a chance that two of those three teams or all of them would have an extra loss, and maybe only the SEC champion would have gotten in. But how much different would that have been from the Big 12? And you see, that's my case with the ACC. I'm not sure the ACC and the Big 12 is that much different. And so Arizona, that essentially became a playoff game. And I thought the ACC game itself was going to be a playoff game. And I thought maybe Alabama would get that last spot. But again, no argument here for me, SMU or Alabama. I don't think any of those teams going in at the 11 seed would have been any more difficult for Penn State than either one of them. And look, I can even make a case that SMU might be just as good as Indiana. I could have made a case for them putting SMU at 10 and Indiana at 11, and I would have not had an argument with that either. But I do like the fact that we don't have any conference matchups in round one, and doing that would have pitted Indiana against Penn State, SMU against Notre Dame, and I would not have wanted to see Indiana play Penn State in the first round. I think overall, looking at the bracket, aside from Oregon having what I feel is a bad draw, the top half of that bracket, Tennessee, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas. I know Clemson hasn't been that good, but it's still Dabo. They're still a conference champion. There's still a little bit of pedigree there. Arizona State's coming in extremely hot. I look at the top half of the bracket, and I'm just like, wow. If I'm number one Oregon, I'm thinking to myself, man, we got the best team, but man, we got one heck of a draw. And look, I've been saying this for a couple of weeks, and I don't know if this is really going to come to fruition now because of the draw, but I could make a case. I've been saying for a couple of weeks now that on a neutral field, I think I would take the Volunteers over every other SEC team right now. But you know what? To be the best, you got to beat the best. They're going to get a chance to go to Ohio State. I like the Volunteers' chances in that matchup. I feel Tennessee built very similar to Michigan, except they're better. I think a lot better than Michigan. And Ohio State's reeling right now. I mean, people are already calling for Ryan Day's head, and they still have to play this playoff game. So we'll see what happens. But I think Tennessee's in a really good spot. And what I like about the matchup, if Tennessee's able to get through Ohio State in that first round, is they're going to get an Oregon team that's going to be idle for about 3 weeks. And Tennessee's going to get a game before that matchup. And you just wonder, we see it historically in NFL football, where sometimes those top seeded teams, they rest their starters in the final week, they get a bye in the playoffs, and then they come out a little rusty in that opening playoff game. That's going to be the situation Oregon's going to be in. The playoffs aren't going to start to December 20th. That's when the first round starts. So they're not going to play till after that. They're going to be off for about 3 or 4 weeks. We'll see how that affects some of these first round teams. Whereas for Georgia, it seems to be an advantage given the uncertainty of Carson Beck's injury and whether or not the backup's going to get extra time to prepare as the starter. But let's look at this from a college fantasy football perspective, right? Where do you draft? Like, there, to me, all right, I do like Texas's draw. But then it's like, okay, well, Texas, we've been like, okay, who do we pick in that backfield all year anyway? You got Cameron Scatabo out there who's just a monster. It's almost hard not to pick him. But, I thought Texas's front seven were really good, but Georgia really manhandled them in the second half there. You wonder if Arizona State can keep that game close. Scatabo would be a nice pick there, even though you're not going to get the extra game. Do you ride Tennessee and Ohio State in a matchup against Oregon, or do you decide to just take a part of the bracket and say, hey, I'm going to go in on Tennessee, Ohio State, Oregon players if I can get them, knowing I might get a semifinal matchup? It's going to be interesting to see. I think right now, when you look at this, when you look at the way the bracket's set up from a college fantasy football standpoint, I almost think like a player like Nicholas Singleton, Tyler Warren look really good right now. They're not going to have a bye. And on paper, Penn State looks like they're going to get at least on paper, they may get 3 games. You know, so it's very intriguing. It's always a crapshoot. Usually, the bowl season fantasy leagues have been okay. You get 1 game, you draft all the players from all the bowl teams, and however it plays out, you get the 1 game and you get a ton of matchups. There are a lot of mismatches to take advantage of. But we started doing away with the bowl season fantasy leagues about 4 or 5 years ago because there were just too many players opting out. And now with the transfer portal, it's just too much. And there was a way to bring it back because these players are not going to opt out of these college football playoff games. So it's a chance to bring back the bowl season fantasy leagues in the playoff format. But the way that we're going to do it is that you're going to get your player all the way through. So now, on top of getting the most talented players, you really have to be able to forecast the bracket as well and see where can I get at least 2 games from every player. And so that's going to be some of the dilemma that you're going to be faced with if you're drafting a Cam Scatabo in that, hey, or an Ashton Genty, we know we're going to get a really good game out of them. But is there a chance to get 2 good games out of them, or in some cases, 3 good games out of them, like you will with some other players? So we'll get into more and dive into the fantasy matchups, but this was just more of a reaction show. Overall, here's what I feel. I feel still the Big Ten and the SEC have favorable draws because when you look at this on paper, given Tennessee, Ohio State are going to rough one another up a little bit, Oregon has to feel pretty good. But I don't think it's a good draw for Oregon. But either way, an SEC team or a Big Ten team's coming out of that part of the bracket. When you look at the top half of the draw, on paper, Texas got the better draw. I can see Texas playing in the semifinals. And again, you're looking at an SEC team. You look at the Penn State matchup against SMU. They get that matchup at home. Who knows what the weather will be December 20th? If it's icy, really cold, you have to figure that plays an advantage to Penn State. There's a lot of guys up there, you guys up there in Big Ten country are like, we'd love to be able to play these playoff games, late season games. Let's see what the SEC does if they could go on the road and play a home game, a road game in the Big Ten. Well, Penn State's got a home game now, but they're going to get it against SMU. But on paper, Penn State to me looks like the better team on paper to win 2 matchups. Again, that works in favor of the Big Ten for Penn State to possibly get to the semifinals. And then when you look at the bottom half of the bracket, if Georgia is healthy, I think Indiana Notre Dame is an intriguing matchup, but you have to like Georgia's chances to come out of that bottom half of the bracket. And so really when you look at it, we could be into the semifinals with quite possibly the top 4 teams anyway: Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Penn State. Now, we know we're going to get an upset or 2 here or there. If I had to put my money on it, I'd probably be more scared if I were Oregon and Georgia, the 1 and 2 seeds. I just think that there's something about I think Notre Dame could be a sneaky team in this tournament. I really do. And I think Ohio State could be dangerous, knowing that Ryan Day could be playing with house money because he could be gone. He may just roll the dice and go for broke. And I do think Tennessee's a dangerous draw just because of their style for somebody like Oregon, who didn't really slow down Penn State in that Big Ten matchup game. So for me, Oregon and Georgia, to me, I'd be on upset alert. I think Texas, Penn State on paper gets the best draw. And overall, I think the bracket favors the Big Ten and SEC. And of course, they got the most teams in, so you would say that. But I just think when you look at the path, Oregon got the toughest draw, but they still are going to get an SEC Big Ten team. So that's going to guarantee one of those teams in the semifinal. Texas on paper. Arizona State's hot. I just don't see how Clemson or Arizona State match up against Texas. I can make a case that SMU could give Penn State trouble. I can make a case that Boise could give Penn State fits. But how fun would it be to see an SMU Boise State matchup in the semifinal? And of course, if you're a Georgia fan, you're kind of rooting for that one. But the team I'm probably disrespecting more than any right now would be Indiana, because like I said, I might even take SMU over Indiana. I'm not really sure. But I think Notre Dame could make some noise as well. So, look, I know the first four out: Alabama, Miami. I could even make a case for South Carolina. My solution is we just go to 16 teams, no buys, first round, all on site, and we just go from there. We just rank them 1 through 16. I feel like that's the more logical way. It'll be interesting to see how this field unfolds with the way that the wonkiness in which the number 9 and the number 12 team in the countries were given by. So I feel it really it weighted this bracket in a very uneven way that I feel. And look, even if Oregon is the best team, they're going to have to win it. But I feel Oregon has the deck most stacked against them in this tournament. So we'll see how it plays out. I mean, imagine if Beck doesn't come back for Georgia and Stockton is just ho-hum. That opens up the entire bottom half of the bracket for just about any team out there. And if that's the case, you have to love your chances if you're in the bottom half of this draw. Whereas if you're in the top half of this draw, by the time you get to the college football playoff, what you're going to have to worry about and what some teams are going to have to worry about. Look, they're all going to have to worry about this, but Clemson might not be that good, but they're going to be physical. Texas is going to have to play them. The winner of that game is going to play a very physical Arizona State team. They may have too much for them, or Texas may have too much for them, but Arizona State is going to be physical. Tennessee, Ohio State is going to be physical. The winner of that game against going to play Oregon, that's going to be a physical matchup. And I'm not saying anybody in the bottom half of the bracket isn't going to be physical, but when I think of SMU, I don't think physical. When I think of Indiana, I don't think physical. Penn State, yeah. Notre Dame, yes. Georgia, yes. Boise, Boise, I just don't know if Boise's deserving of the 3 seed. I know there are only losses to Oregon, but if you're really going to take into account scheduling, then and strength of scheduling, then I could have made a case for Boise being the 12 seed, to be quite honest with you, because if Boise were to play Clemson, who would you put your money on in that matchup? And that would be hard to pick against Clemson, in my opinion. So Boise gets the 3, and I would have had no argument if Boise would have gotten the 12, which would then have changed everything because Arizona State probably would have gotten the 4. The Clemson would have gotten the 5. And then Boise would have been a matchup against Texas. Boy, I would have loved to have seen that. Ashton Genty against Texas. But look, we're playing out hypotheticals here. A lot to digest. A lot of difference of opinion. For me, no love lost on who they put in there at the 11th seed. I do think SMU saved their season by making a game of it in the end, because had Clemson won that game by 17 points, I do think we would have seen Bama in that spot. I don't think Miami ever had a shot. So we'll see. That's my reaction to this bracket. We'll do another show next week where we get into some fantasy forecasting for the upcoming college football playoff and the fantasy leagues that we're going to run. We have not posted registration on the site yet because it looks like we will not be able to use Fantrack's treasurer for the leagues. We'll probably have to do it through a PayPal or through a Venmo, with the restrictions that Fantrax puts on collecting on such a short time frame on a season. But we're going to get those details to you. That's the reaction, my reaction for the college football playoff 12-team field. More to come next week in regards to fantasy matchups. But look, let's have fun with this. The playoffs are here, and we're going to get another college fantasy football season. 6-team leagues forming, and the rosters are going to probably be about 12 teams each. It looks like we have settled on a team quarterback format, so you don't have to worry about individual quarterbacks. So that'll help you in regards to Georgia. The defense special teams are going to be team format, so there'll be no individual kickers. Kickers will be included in the defense, and then you will have individual running backs, wide receiver / tight ends, and then flex position, which will be running back, wide receiver, and tight ends. So with 6-team formats, every defense and every team quarterback will be selected. You'll be limited to 2. That way everybody gets balance in their rosters. But like I said, registration to come most likely before the end of this upcoming week. So there it is. 12-team field is set. Let the college football playoffs begin. And until next week's show, when we preview some fantasy stuff, I'll talk to you then.